Today, we're going to tell you about a man who turned a California highway into the scene of his crimes. William Bonin is one of the most brutal serial killers in U.S. history. Officially, 14 victims are confirmed, but it is believed there were many more. Dozens of mangled destinies and a system that gave him a chance to start over 3 times. He didn't just kill, he enjoyed power over his victims. And the worst part, he could have been stopped much sooner. William George Bonin was born on January 8, 1947, in the small town of Wilmantic, Connecticut. He was the middle son in the family of Robert and Alice Bonin. His father returned from the front after World War II with a shattered psyche and an addiction to alcohol. Instead of trying to organize his life, outbursts of rage, domestic violence, and complete lack of care for the children. Mother, unable to cope with the situation, also began to drink. William and his brothers grew up in complete poverty. The children were often fed and clothed by neighbors. The boys were often babysat by their maternal grandfather. Alice later admitted that he had raped her when she was young and then probably abused her children as well. In this hell, 6-year-old William learned to be silent. He did not just tolerate violence, but over time began to see it as something normal, as part of life. Cruelty became the norm for him, the only understandable way of existence. When the boy was 6 years old, his mother still tried to keep the children safe. She put them in a Catholic orphanage, but conditions there were no better. There, Bonin was systematically beaten. For the slightest offense, the children were punished. They were often forced to stand in painful poses for hours. Among the most excruciating punishments was being dunked headfirst into a sink or toilet. But the worst was a visit from a Catholic priest. He regularly came to give lectures on purity, faith, and morality, and then chose a boy to take to a separate room. Subsequently, William became his favorite and was abused on a regular basis. Later, the abuse was continued by older teenagers. William refused to discuss his experiences at the orphanage, only mentioning that he only agreed to sexual contact with older students if he was tied up beforehand with his hands behind his back. When William turned 10, he broke the law for the first time by stealing a license plate from a car, for which he was sent to a juvenile detention center. There he was again bullied. Several people, including the warden, repeatedly beat and raped him. At the age of 14, he returned home. William began molesting boys in the neighborhood, including his own younger brother. He repeated with the children what was being done to him. In essence, Bonin was trying to master a situation in which he had always been powerless. He had a weapon, power, and he began to use it. Along with this, in his youth, he committed theft, robbery, and other petty offenses. After completing his secondary education in 1965, the 18-year-old Bonin was ordered by his mother to get engaged to a girl. She hoped that marriage would cure his homosexual tendencies. That same year, 1965, he volunteered for service in the U.S. Air Force. The Army gave him a legal way to be aggressive and even receive rewards for it. William participated in combat operations and was even awarded a medal for bravery. By his own admission, during this time, he had sexual relations with both women and men, and once even raped 2 fellow soldiers at gunpoint. In October 1968, William was honorably discharged from the Army. He returned to his mother in California and soon married his fiancée, but the marriage quickly broke up. The girl, having learned of his orientation, filed for divorce. Shortly thereafter, he assaulted a 12-year-old boy. Bonin noticed the child in the street and stopped his car and offered him a ride home. The boy did not suspect anything wrong. The adult in front of him seemed friendly and willing to help. However, William drove the boy to a deserted place. There, he ordered him to undress, and when the child refused, he beat him on the head with an iron rod. He tied his hands and then raped him. The boy was found unconscious by the roadside. From the end of 1968, Bonin acted regularly, almost systematically. His victims were boys, schoolboys, teenagers, aged between 12 and 15. He would wait for them outside schools, at bus stops, on the streets, and offer them a ride. Sometimes he promised to show them something interesting, treat them to a soda or ice cream. Sometimes he just smiled and pretended he wanted to help. Then everything developed according to a well-tried scenario. A blow to the head to stop the victim from screaming, a noose around the neck to stop her from twitching. Then he tied them up with rope or duct tape and raped them. He threatened several boys with a knife. bringing the blade to their throats to finally crush their will to resist. In just 4 months, there are at least 5 confirmed assaults. Some he forced into oral sex, others he raped with extreme brutality. The victims had multiple injuries, abrasions, bruises, ligature marks on their wrists and ankles. One boy suffered internal organ damage, and another had a broken collarbone. In March 1969, Bonin attempted to drag a 16-year-old teenager into his van. The young man screamed and resisted. Fortunately, passers-by happened to be nearby and heard the screams. They saw an adult male forcefully pulling the teenager into the vehicle and called the police. The patrolmen arrested Bonin right at the scene. He was charged with 5 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of sodomy, 1 count of forcing oral sex, and 1 count of lewd acts on 5 victims. Bonin took a plea bargain and pleaded guilty. The court found that William Bonin suffers from a severe mental disorder due to a traumatic childhood. William was sent not to prison, but to a maximum security psychiatric facility. Doctors monitored him for almost 3 years. According to the results of the examination, he was found to have antisocial personality disorder and a predilection for sadism. The specialists also found that he had damage to the part of his brain responsible for self-control. Because of this, Bonin could not restrain strong emotions, especially anger and sexual excitement. He also had little or no empathy for other people. On the body of William, found dozens of scars, old burns, lacerations, marks from blows. He himself could not explain their origin. Most likely, these are the results of systematic violence experienced in childhood. Just consciousness has pushed so terrible memories out of his head. In 1973, he was transferred to a regular prison where he quickly became a model prisoner. A year later, doctors concluded that Bonin was not a danger to others, and he was released from prison. However, he was not free for long. A year and a half later, he returned to prison for the rape of a teenager. 14-year-old David McVicker was hitchhiking home when a green van pulled up next to him. The driver looked polite and trustworthy, so the teenager bravely got into the car. But everything changed already on the road. Bonin propositioned the boy for sex. When he refused, he pulled out a gun, tied McVicker up, beat him and raped him. Afterward, he began strangling him, using the boy's t-shirt as a ligature. David begged him not to kill him. Suddenly, Bonin let him go and took him home. The teenager immediately told his mother. She called the police. McVicker described the van and the attacker's appearance. Bonin was arrested 2 days later and charged with assault and attempted murder. In prison, Bonin continued his attacks on fellow inmates. But in 1978, he was again released on parole. Another mistake by the system. Officially, he was not supposed to go near minors, but no one monitored Bonin's compliance. He rented a place near his mother and got a job working for a delivery service. Almost immediately, he remodeled the van, removed the door handles, bought green carpet that absorbed blood perfectly. Under the seat were ropes, knives, handcuffs, a tire iron, and a roll of duct tape. By then, Bonin had concluded that he needed to kill each of his victims so that no one else could testify against him. At one of the parties, he meets Vernon Butts, a thin, pale 20-year-old guy obsessed with sadism and the occult. Bonin showed him newspaper clippings of his past assaults. Butts was enthusiastic and suggested that they start killing together. He later confessed that he was afraid of Bonin, but enjoyed watching him torture his victims. In the summer of 1979, Bonin and Butts were driving down the Pacific Highway. A 17-year-old hitchhiker, Marcus Grubbs, a German student traveling in the United States, got into their van. They drove him to a deserted part of Malibu Canyon, tied him up, beat him, raped him, and then stabbed him 77 times. The body was dumped in a ravine. Another victim was 13-year-old Thomas Lundgren. He was on his way to meet a friend and got into a van on the way. His body was found near the freeway. The boy had a fractured skull, slit throat, and severed genitals. Despite the similarities to the previous case, police saw no connection. The brutality of the crimes kept escalating. It was as if Bonin needed an increasing dose of violence to continue to enjoy himself. On August 4th, 17-year-old Mark Shelton went missing. He was on his way to a movie theater in Westminster. A van cut him off, and Bonin forcibly dragged him inside. Buzz was behind the wheel. As he circled the neighborhood, Bonin raped the young man and inserted a pool cue rectally. Death was caused by painful shock. The body was dumped in Cajon Pass. By fall, the murders were becoming more frequent. They found characteristic marks on the bodies: strangulation, bluish streaks from a tire iron, green carpet fibers. But police in different counties weren't connecting the cases. On the night of February 3, 1980, Bonin committed 2 murders at once. This time he had a new accomplice with him, 19-year-old Gregory Miley, a man with intellectual disabilities. He agreed to participate for food and money. Their victim was 15-year-old Charles Miranda. While Bonin raped the boy, Miley drove around town in circles. Then the accomplice tried to rape the victim with a screwdriver, leaving deep wounds. Afterward, they strangled him with a tire iron. A few hours later, before they could get rid of the corpse, they picked up 12-year-old James McCabe. The boy was waiting for a bus to Disneyland. Miley jumped up out of boredom and beat the boy, breaking all of his ribs. Both victims were dumped at different ends of the county. On March 14, 1980, 18-year-old Ronald Gatlin left a friend's house and disappeared. A day later, his body was found in a ditch near Duarte. Bound hands, lips blue from strangulation, and deep awl wounds in his ears. In April, the victim was 19-year-old Darren Lee Kendrick. He was lured into a house with an offer to buy drugs. There, he was forcibly injected with chloral hydrate, a substance that causes chemical burns. While Kendrick convulsed, Bonin raped him, and Butts drove an ice pick into his ear. Police found the body with the handle sticking out. Bonin was out hunting almost every week. Sean King, 14, screamed in pain so loudly that Bonin later called him his favorite victim. The body was found a day after the murder. Lawrence Sharp, 17, was beaten beyond recognition. His body was dumped in a dumpster behind a gas station. 14-year-old Harry Turner was abducted with the help of another accomplice, William Pugh. He would later testify to the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Bonin confessed to 21 murders, but it is believed that the real number of his victims could be close to 40. However, this hypothesis remains unconfirmed. The public remained in the dark for a long time. It was not until March 1980 that a journalist published an investigation that pointed out the similarities between a number of murders. The MO of the crimes was identical. He was the first to voice what the police refused to acknowledge. All these murders could have been the work of one man. Under media pressure, county law enforcement finally officially recognized there was a serial killer operating in the region. They did so only after newspapers and television stations began publishing disturbing articles. The public demanded explanations. The turning point was the arrest of 17-year-old William Ray Pugh, who had stolen a car. Realizing that he was facing serious punishment, he offered a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would tell who was behind a series of brutal murders. The young man's testimony changed the course of the investigation. He gave the name William Bonin. The young man did not admit that he himself participated in one murder, but otherwise told everything he knew. Pugh's testimony contained details that could not have been known to a random person. The police began round-the-clock surveillance of Bonin. At the same time, investigators pulled up the archives and discovered a disturbing picture. Old convictions, psychiatric reports, rape and assault charges. Everything pointed to a repeat offender with a dangerous history, but there was still not enough evidence to make an arrest. On June 2, 1980, Bonin killed his last confirmed victim, 18-year-old Stephen J. Wells. The boy agreed to come to Bonin and his accomplice James Monroe for $200. In return, he had to have sex with them and allow himself to be tied up. But once he was in the apartment, the deal turned into a death trap. Bonin beat him, tied him up, and strangled him with a t-shirt. According to Monroe, he tried to stop the killing, but William said it was too late. The body was packed in a box and dumped outside a gas station in Huntington Beach. The next day, Bonin calmly returned home, unaware that he had long been under suspicion. On June 11, undercover operatives followed his van. They witnessed Bonin pick up a teenager on the street, take him to a deserted location, and proceed to abuse him. At the right moment, the police intervened. When they opened the door of the van, they saw the moment of the crime. A 17-year-old boy was lying on the floor, partially undressed, with his hands tied and a tight noose around his neck. Bonin was squeezing the victim's throat and simultaneously trying to rape him. Police officers pulled the killer away, freeing the teenager. That's how Bonin was caught red-handed at the scene. That was the end of it. A search of the car found duct tape, ropes, knives, and newspaper clippings of the very murders Bonin himself had committed. He kept them, made notes, crossed them out, highlighted the dates. They also found upholstery and carpeting inside the van that matched fibers found on the victims' bodies. The evidence finally came together. Immediately after his arrest, Bonin cooperated with the investigation. He talked about his accomplices. In all, 4 young men were involved in his crimes. Investigators would later say, Bonin chose his helpers as cold-bloodedly as his victims. He looked for those who were easy to control, weak, malleable, dependent on the will of others. He found them among the lonely, the poor, the mentally retarded, or simply the impressionable. His closest associate was Vernon Butts, a young man with sadistic tendencies and a dark interest in the occult. He didn't just help, he enjoyed the experience. Butts' confessions were so frightening that even experienced investigators asked for time to recover from interrogations. But in January 1981, he was found hanged in his cell. The official version was suicide, but it is likely that other inmates killed him. Gregory Miley, a mentally disabled teenager, was involved in at least 2 murders. He testified that Bonin promised him food and money while forcing him to participate in the violence. Miley pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 life terms. He died in prison in 2016 after a conflict with another inmate. James Monroe, the youngest of the accomplices, joined Bonin at the end of his criminal activities. He was by his side when Stephen J. Wells died. Monroe claimed he tried to prevent the murder, but couldn't, and received a 15-year sentence in exchange for cooperating with the investigation. And finally, William Pugh, a 17-year-old teenager whom Bonin implicated in one of the episodes. When Pugh was caught stealing a car, he made a deal himself. He told about the crimes he had seen, gave Bonin's name, and gave details to the investigation. It was his testimony that became the impetus that helped police speed up the arrest. After that, Pugh disappeared from the public eye. There is almost no reliable information about his fate in open sources. Some crime reporters later wrote that he changed his name and went to another state under the Witness Protection Program. The investigation concluded quickly. The amount of evidence and confessions was overwhelming. In investigative interviews, Bonin told everything without a shred of embarrassment. The investigators were shocked not only by the number of victims, but also by Bonin's demeanor. He spoke calmly, without a shadow of remorse. On the contrary, he described his actions with frightening precision, as if he were reliving everything that had happened. The killer expressed no remorse. He was only upset that he had been caught and regretted that he could no longer continue committing crimes. In 1982, Bonin was convicted on 10 counts. In 1983, on 4 more cases in Orange County, 14 proven episodes in all. In 1986, another charge was added to which Bonin pleaded guilty. But the investigation suspected there could have been more than 40 victims. Some bodies were never found. Some cases were left in doubt because of a lack of evidence. Bonin himself once said he stopped counting after 20 victims. The court sentenced him to death. He became the first inmate in the history of San Quentin prison to be executed by lethal injection. But even on death row, he didn't stop. He drew, wrote, kept diaries, and corresponded with other serial killers. On February 23, 1996, he uttered his last words. "The death penalty does not solve anything. It sends the wrong message to young people, as if you can respond with violence to violence." At 11:13 p.m., he was pronounced dead. None of his family came to the execution. His body was cremated. The ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. William Bonin's story is not only the tale of a serial killer, but also of the system that allowed him to grow, evolve, and perfect violence. He started with harassment, moved on to rape, and then to torture and murder. Each new crime became tougher, more elaborate. He sought control, power, submission. And with each new crime, that hunger only grew stronger. He had no empathy, no boundaries, no guilt. Bonin made no secret of the fact that he felt freer with each victim. His childhood was filled with pain, causing him to understand only the language of violence. He didn't know how to interact with the world any other way. Bonin had psychiatric diagnoses, proven assaults, and child abuse convictions under his belt. and still he was being released unsupervised. He should have been recognized as a danger to society, but the system chose to turn a blind eye. It's hard to imagine such a thing today. Authorities are required to report the whereabouts of sex offenders, and monitoring is much stricter. But the system didn't work then, and dozens of teenagers paid for it with their lives.